If you believe these stories must be remembered, subscribe to Echoes of Valor and help keep history alive.
At 06:15 on May 11, 1943, the fog over Massacre Bay looked less like weather and more like a living barrier. Thick, metallic, and cold enough that every breath felt like sucking air through wet cloth. The 7th Infantry Division had expected rain, wind, and the crushing chill that made the Aleutians infamous. What they hadn't expected was the silence. No gulls, no surf, no wind. It was as if the entire island held its breath, waiting for the first American to make a mistake. Private First Class Henry Walsh stepped off the landing craft and felt his boots sink instantly into knee-deep muskeg, cold mud swallowing him like quicksand. His M1 Garand was already slick with salt moisture despite being covered. The men of his platoon formed a loose, staggered line, advancing into a world where visibility rarely exceeded 20 feet. Somewhere beyond that curtain of fog was the Japanese garrison, tough, mountain-trained troops who'd been living on Attu for nearly a year. U.S. intelligence claimed their morale was low, their supplies thin, their positions vulnerable. But after only 10 minutes on the island, Walsh understood the truth. Attu itself was their strongest weapon. No trenches, no fields, no landmarks, just endless white fog soaking the bones and erasing any sense of direction. As the Americans moved inland, the tundra began to rise in steep, sharp ridges carved by glaciers and wind. Every incline hurt, every breath stung. The fog shifted in waves, swallowing whole squads before revealing them again in ghostly outlines. The island felt empty, but the emptiness was a lie. By 9 a.m., scattered gunfire flickered through the fog like sparks in a blizzard. Invisible shots. No source, no echo, just impact. A sergeant ahead of Walsh dropped without a sound. A neat entry wound just above the collarbone, blood mixing instantly with the icy soil. The platoon dove for cover, but there was no cover, only wet grass and scattered rocks that offered no protection from a rifle they couldn't see. This was the moment when the rumors began. Someone whispered that a Japanese sniper had been shadowing their advance. Someone else claimed 2 men from another company had been killed in the same silent way. The story grew fast. A marksman who fired only when the fog thickened, who used the island's shifting winds to mask the sound, who left no muzzle flash. The men started calling him the Ghost of Attu. Walsh didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in instincts, and his were screaming that this battlefield wasn't normal. It wasn't a clash of armies, it was a hunt, and the Americans were the ones being hunted. As the fog tightened around them again, turning the world into a white cocoon of cold and fear, Walsh gripped his rifle and realized something that chilled him more than the wind ever could. If they didn't find that phantom sniper soon, Attu would swallow the entire division, piece by piece, one silent bullet at a time. The fog on Attu didn't just hide the enemy, it shaped him. By the second day of fighting, the Americans began to understand that the sniper stalking them wasn't just skilled, he was built for this island. Every time a patrol moved up a ridge, someone dropped. No sound, no warning, no glint of metal or silhouette on the skyline. Private Walsh's platoon lost 3 men on Cleavesy Pass in under 5 minutes, each shot fired from a different direction, or so it seemed. The medics reported identical entry angles, identical wound patterns, perfectly centered, perfectly timed. A single shooter, a single rifle, a single ghost. Rumors spread faster than the fog, that the sniper had trained in Manchuria, that he'd hunted Soviet patrols along the Amur River, that he'd fought in China's mountains long before the Aleutians. His rifle was said to be a Type 97, scoped, heavy, and deadly precise in the hands of someone who understood wind shifts better than most men understood language. But what unnerved the Americans was not his accuracy, it was his restraint. He never fired twice from the same spot, never targeted wounded men, never wasted a shot. He killed with the patience of someone who knew exactly when the island would shroud him in mist. The Japanese soldiers called him Yuki no Oni, the demon in the snow. The Americans found a different name, the Phantom Marksman. By May 14th, the sniper had become a strategic threat. Battalion commanders were forced to change routes, slow their advance, and send entire companies to clear ridgelines that yielded no trace of him. At night, when the wind stopped and the tundra fell silent, officers swore they could hear a single boot scraping rock in the darkness. Then nothing. Walsh's unit discovered shallow depressions carved into the frozen soil, perfectly positioned to overlook natural choke points. Not holes, not nests, just temporary firing positions used once and abandoned. This wasn't improvisation, it was discipline bordering on artistry. Walsh began to study the terrain more than the enemy, memorizing angles, ridge lines, moss patterns, anything that might reveal where the next shot would come from. He'd fought Japanese soldiers before, but never like this. This sniper didn't miss, didn't panic, didn't exist beyond the damage he inflicted. As another patrol was pinned by a single shot echoing through the fog, Walsh felt the crushing weight of realization. This wasn't just a battle between armies. It was becoming a duel, one fought across an island where the ground, the weather, and the silence all favored the man in the shadows. And unless someone found him soon, the Phantom Marksman would bleed the division dry. Corporal Sam Ryder never expected to be in a sniper hunt. He wasn't scout-trained, hadn't attended any marksmanship schools, and didn't even consider himself exceptional with a rifle. Back in Kansas, he spent more time fixing tractors than shooting coyotes. But on Attu, skill sets stopped mattering the moment the fog rolled in. Ryder was assigned to the K Company as a standard rifleman, nothing more. But by May 17th, after the Phantom Marksman killed two of the company's best observers and pinned down an entire platoon for nearly an hour, Ryder was the only man who had spotted something the others missed. A faint recoil signature in the snow, a subtle tremor of brush on a ridge that shouldn't have been moving. It wasn't enough to take a shot, but it was enough to track one. Word spread to the officers, and Ryder found himself volunteered for the most dangerous job on the island, counter-sniper duty. He didn't argue. He didn't have time to. Within an hour, he was handed a pair of fogged binoculars, a scoped M1903 someone had pulled off a casualty, and the order that nobody wanted to give aloud: find him before he finds us. Ryder didn't feel brave or ready. He felt misplaced, like a farmhand shoved into a gunfight. But he also felt responsible. He'd been the only one to see the signs. And on Attu, seeing first meant living longer. What Ryder discovered that afternoon changed the rhythm of the hunt. While most men scanned ridgelines and rocky outcrops, Ryder studied the ground, just like he studied wheat rows back home. He noticed depressions where moss had been flattened, rocks that had been shifted half an inch, shallow pockets of snow with a different texture. The sniper wasn't choosing the high ground. He was blending into slopes where no one expected a firing position. Ryder realized the phantom marksman wasn't hiding from the Americans. He was hiding inside the terrain itself, using it like a second skin. Every clue Ryder found led to another, and soon he had a mental map of potential nests, 30, maybe 40 spots the sniper might use, each offering a perfect line of fire for exactly one shot. Ryder had never hunted a man, but he had hunted foxes that raided his family's farm. Foxes smart enough to double back, circle the wind, and lie still until the world forgot they were there. This felt the same, except the stakes were measured in lives, not livestock. As Ryder crawled across the frozen tundra, fingers numb, breath shallow, Ryder understood the truth. He wasn't just tracking a killer. He was stepping into a duel he hadn't asked for, against an opponent who had already dominated every man who tried to find him. And somewhere in the fog, that opponent was waiting.
The hunt began at 4:58, when the wind shifted and the fog pulled back just enough for Ryder to see the far slope of Fishhook Ridge. It wasn't visibility, it was a suggestion of shape, the faintest outline of terrain returning to existence. Ryder pressed himself flat against the frosted earth, watching the ridge for any flicker of movement. Nothing. Not a shadow, not a glint, not a breath of life. The phantom marksman had vanished again. But Ryder knew better. Nobody fired with that precision and walked away casually. The sniper was out there, hidden in the folds of rock and snow, waiting for a single mistake. Ryder dug his elbows deeper into the frost and began moving, slow, deliberate, measuring his progress by inches rather than feet. He scanned for patterns, brush bent against the wind instead of with it, a patch of snow too smooth, a rock that should have been covered but wasn't. Each clue was smaller than a footprint, smaller than the twitch of a finger on the trigger. Attu didn't give hunters tracks, it gave hints. And if you missed even one, you died. Ryder pushed forward, letting the terrain swallow him. Fog drifted in low curtains, forming shapes that evaporated before he could focus. Twice he thought he saw the sniper's muzzle. Twice he realized it was just the island playing tricks on him. But on the third time, when a darker patch of stone lingered one heartbeat too long, Ryder froze. That wasn't rock. It was fabric, camouflage, a firing hide shaped perfectly to the hillside, invisible unless you already knew how to look for it.
Ryder pivoted, angling himself downslope to avoid silhouette. His breath turned to frost on the stock of the rifle. One wrong exhale could flash white in the air and give him away. He steadied his nerves, sinking deeper into the tundra until his world collapsed to a thin line of sight. Every muscle in his body screamed from cold and tension, but he held his position. The phantom marksman had set the range at approximately 450 yards, ideal for concealment, deadly for anyone approaching from below. Ryder studied the hide, watching for the smallest living detail, a blink, a pulse, a shift of weight. Then he saw it, barely visible,
almost imagined the subtle contraction of a gloved hand adjusting a sling. The sniper was preparing to fire, lining up another American in his sights. Ryder didn't have angles, didn't have time, didn't even have certainty. What he did have was instinct, the same instinct that had warned him the night before when others dismissed the danger. He centered the reticle on the faint shape, exhaled, and let the world narrow to a single still point. The hunt was no longer about finding the sniper. It was about striking before an unseen enemy erased another life. On that silent, frozen slope, Ryder understood the truth. He wasn't stalking the invisible anymore. He was in firing range of it.
The ambush zone formed itself without warning. Ryder didn't choose it. Attu did. 3 ridge lines converged into a narrow basin choked with ice, shattered rock, and wind-carved snowdrifts deep enough to swallow a man whole. It was a perfect trap, the kind of natural geometry every sniper feared. A triangle of exposed ground with only 2 real exits, both in full view of the high ground. Ryder reached its center before he realized what had happened. A single shot cracked from the north slope, the bullet slashing the snow inches from his boot. Another snapped from the west ridge. The Phantom wasn't alone. The sniper had drawn him into a kill box, 3 firing lanes, overlapping angles and 0 cover, except for a handful of stones scattered like broken teeth across the tundra. Ryder dove hard, sliding behind a slab of basalt barely thick enough to stop a rifle round. The wind ripped across the basin, carrying the smell of cordite and frozen earth. He was pinned, frost biting at his knuckles. No movement, no retreat. Every direction held a rifle aimed at his heartbeat.
He slowed his breathing, forcing his pulse to settle. The first rule of a kill box was simple: survive long enough to break its rhythm. Ryder peered through a crack between rocks, studying the ridge lines. The triangle wasn't symmetrical. The north ridge had heavy drift formations, great for concealment, terrible for stability. The Phantom marksman had chosen the west ridge instead, the one with firmer stone and cleaner lanes of fire. That meant the other shooter, the decoy, was the one firing from the north. Ryder shifted slightly, calculating angles. The Phantom always shot twice, one to test, one to kill. He waited for the second shot. It came, sharp and disciplined, slicing a strand of wind-blown ice beside his cheek. That was the real sniper. Ryder snapped his rifle up, aimed not at the muzzle flash, but at the shadow tucked beneath an overhang, a void too still to be natural. He fired. The echo slammed across the basin, and the shadow jerked backward out of view. The second shooter panicked, firing wildly from the north ridge. Ryder rolled, repositioned, and returned fire with a single precise shot. Silence folded back over the valley. The frozen triangle of death dissolved. Ryder pushed himself up slowly, breath shaking in the cold. 2 rifles now lay still on the snow, but he knew deep down that Attu wasn't finished with him, and neither was the sniper duel that had begun long before dawn.
The blizzard didn't arrive. It detonated. One moment Ryder could see 50 yards across the tundra. The next he was trapped inside a screaming wall of white, so dense it erased the world.
Snow whipped sideways in blinding sheets, each gust hard enough to knock a grown man off balance. The wind howled like a living thing, drowning out every sound except its own fury. Ryder dropped to a knee, gripping his rifle tight as the temperature plunged. This wasn't just weather. This was Attu's final weapon, one that cared nothing for sides, flags, or survival. A sniper duel in these conditions was suicide, but the Phantom chose this moment. A shot cracked somewhere inside the whiteout, the muzzle flash swallowed instantly by the storm. The bullet ripped past Ryder's shoulder, close enough that he felt the heat of its friction through his parka. The Phantom was still alive, still hunting, still impossibly accurate in a storm that made even standing difficult. Ryder flattened himself against the snow, letting the wind carve around him. In a whiteout, movement was death, but sound was everything. He closed his eyes. The storm masked almost all noise, yet riflemen carried subtle signatures. The click of a bolt, the shift of a boot, the soft scrape of fabric against ice. Ryder listened for a full minute, letting the blizzard's rhythm settle in his mind. Then he heard it, a faint, deliberate crunch, 20 yards to his right, too methodical to be nature. He pivoted slowly, using the storm as camo. The Phantom fired again, blindly this time, searching. Ryder exhaled once, steady and thin, and set his rifle into the crook of his shoulder. Through the swirling white, he caught the faintest distortion, a human silhouette crouched low, drifting between gusts, like a shadow breaking across a lantern. He aimed not at the figure, but at the moment between gusts, when the wind eased by a fraction. When it did, he pulled the trigger. The shot vanished into the storm. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, just wind, white, and silence. Then the silhouette collapsed, disappearing into the snow as though the blizzard had swallowed it whole. Ryder stayed still for another 30 seconds, waiting for a countershot that never came. The duel that had torn through ridges, valleys, and frozen kill zones ended in a world where neither man could see more than 10 steps forward. Only one stood back up. Ryder adjusted his hood, braced against the wind, and pushed onward through the storm. Attu Island had taken everything from him, warmth, safety, and nearly his life, but it hadn't taken his last shot. The storm finally began to weaken, leaving the ridge in a fragile gray calm. Snow drifted in jagged waves across the frozen landscape, masking the scars of the day. Ryder sat on the edge of a shallow crevasse, his back pressed against jagged rock, and surveyed the battlefield. The Phantom was gone, either dead or vanished into the endless white wilderness. Every ridge and snowbank held the evidence of the fight, trampled footprints, spent rounds, and the occasional dark stain where someone hadn't made it through. The air was still, except for the occasional groan of shifting ice and the distant crash of snow-laden trees. It was over, yet the tension didn't leave him. Ryder's hands shook, not from cold, but from the knowledge that survival in Attu demanded more than marksmanship. It demanded luck, timing, and the ability to become invisible in a world designed to erase men. Ryder moved cautiously down the slope, stepping over frozen bodies and discarded equipment. He checked his rifle, counting rounds, and kept his eyes on every shadow, every ridge beyond the next. Behind him, the blizzard had carved a new landscape, one in which familiar paths were gone and each step forward could be the last. Yet he pressed on. The fight wasn't just about defeating a single enemy. It was about enduring. Each movement through the snow, each breath drawn in the icy air reminded him that victory in Attu wasn't celebrated, it was survived. As the sun began to pierce the gray horizon, Ryder paused to look back over the ridge. The battle had claimed many, and history would remember few. But he had endured, and surviving meant the story was still his to tell. Weeks after the battle, the ridge remained a silent testament to what had happened there. The wind sculpted the snow into jagged monuments over the fallen, and only the occasional gull or fox broke the stillness. Ryder, now far from the island, often found his thoughts drifting back to that frozen battlefield. The duel with the phantom marksman had been more than a fight for survival. It was a crucible. Every decision, every shot, every heartbeat in the whiteout had carved lessons into him that no training could teach. He realized that snipers weren't just soldiers. They were shadows, observers, and arbiters of life and death in spaces where conventional warfare failed. The Arctic had tested him in ways that the tropics or European front lines never could. Reports eventually trickled back to command, framing the Attu conflict as a minor engagement in the Aleutian campaign, but those who had been there knew better. Ryder's actions, his perseverance, and his mastery of patience under lethal conditions became case studies in sniper doctrine, quietly influencing training manuals and tactics for future operations. His survival wasn't celebrated with medals or parades. It was honored in the careful retelling of strategy, in the notes of fellow soldiers who'd learned from watching him endure where others fell. The duel had ended, but its legacy endured, etched into the cold, unforgiving terrain, and into the minds of those who understood that warfare was as much about cunning, observation, and restraint as it was about firepower. The Arctic had a way of making legends out of men, but it demanded that they carry the weight of their deeds silently, like shadows against the snow.